No one expected Alex Van Halen, at 71, to break decades of silence, but what he just revealed about Michael Anthony has fans losing their minds. In a shocking new interview, Alex opens up about long-buried tensions, backstage drama, and the truth he says he's never shared until now. What really happened inside the band, and why is he choosing to speak out after all these years? The answers are far more explosive than anyone imagined. For decades, Alex Van Halen stayed mostly quiet, while his brother Eddie often took the spotlight with wild guitar solos, fiery interviews, and headline-making drama. Alex was the steady one in the background, the powerful drummer, the quiet force, the guy who showed up, kept time, and kept the band moving forward. He wasn't known for speaking out, especially not about personal stuff. But now, at 71, Alex has finally opened up. And what he has to say is shaking long-held assumptions about what really happened inside Van Halen. In a rare and emotional moment, Alex talked about his time in the band and his relationship with bassist Michael Anthony, one that was once close but eventually became strained. For years, fans wondered what caused the split between Anthony and the rest of the band. Now, Alex is giving us a glimpse into the truth, and it turns out it wasn't just one thing. It was years of stress, miscommunication, and the slow, painful unraveling of what had started as a brotherhood. Alex didn't point fingers in anger. He spoke like someone who's carried a lot for a long time. Grief over losing his brother, regret over how things ended, and maybe even guilt for not stepping in more when things went off the rails. He acknowledged how Eddie's personal struggles, especially with addiction and control, created tension that affected everyone. Michael, he says, was caught in the middle of a storm that none of them could stop. You could hear the emotion in Alex's voice. This wasn't just about music or band politics, it was personal. He talked about the early days when the band was hungry and full of energy, when everything felt possible. And then he talked about the years that followed, the stress, the pressure, and how fame changed everything. For the first time, Alex gave fans a real look behind the curtain, not the legend, the reality. And in doing so, he finally told his side of the story. In the beginning, it was all about the music. 4 guys, young and fired up, chasing the same dream. Eddie and Alex Van Halen, Michael Anthony, and David Lee Roth weren't just bandmates. They were like brothers. They laughed together, rehearsed until late, and played small clubs like their lives depended on it. There was chemistry, there was energy, and there was a feeling that something big was coming. They weren't wrong. As Van Halen exploded into the rock scene in the late 70s, everything changed. Almost overnight, they went from playing bar gigs to selling out arenas. Their sound was fresh, their shows were wild, and fans couldn't get enough. Eddie's guitar playing was groundbreaking. Alex's drumming was powerful and steady. Michael's harmonies gave songs their soul, and David Lee Roth was the perfect showman. For a while, it was magic. But as the band's success grew, so did the pressure. The fun started to fade, replaced by stress, egos, and the dark side of fame. Money was flowing, expectations were high, and not everyone handled the spotlight the same way. The tight bond they had at the beginning started to stretch, and then, slowly, it began to break. At the center of it all was Eddie Van Halen. A genius on the guitar, no one could deny that. But genius often comes with baggage. Eddie became more intense, more controlling. His perfectionism, once a strength, started pushing people away. He wanted things his way, and if you didn't fall in line, you were left behind or pushed out. Michael Anthony, always known as the nice guy in the band, started feeling the shift early. He had been with the group since the beginning, helping build their sound and bringing stability to the rhythm section. But over time, it seemed like his voice mattered less and less. Eddie's grip on the band tightened, and creative decisions became more one-sided. Alex, Eddie's older brother, was caught in the middle. He loved both Eddie and Michael. He had played beside both of them for decades, but family ties ran deep. And even when things got tense, Alex stood by Eddie, even if it meant staying silent during difficult moments. It wasn't just creative control that started tearing the band apart. Eddie was dealing with his own personal battles, substance abuse, emotional struggles, and the pressure of always having to be the one to deliver something new. Those issues started bleeding into rehearsals, into performances, into relationships. According to Michael, Eddie's mood swings were tough to predict. One day he'd be brilliant and charming. The next he'd be distant and angry. David Lee Roth eventually left the band, and new singers came and went. But even as the lineup changed, the issues behind the scenes didn't go away. If anything, they got worse. The band was functioning more like a business than a group of friends making music. Every tour, every album, every meeting was heavier. And for Michael, the joy was disappearing. What once felt like family started to feel like survival. Behind closed doors, the tension between Eddie and Michael was becoming impossible to ignore. Conversations turned into arguments. Trust turned into resentment. Eddie's inner circle began to shrink, and Michael wasn't in it anymore. Decisions were made without him. His bass lines were re-recorded. His input was ignored. Eventually, he was quietly pushed out. There was no big fight, no official goodbye, just distance, just silence. And that silence hurt. For fans, Michael's absence was huge. His voice, those high harmonies layered behind every chorus, was a signature part of Van Halen's sound. His stage presence was solid and loyal. He was the kind of guy who showed up, gave everything, and never made it about ego. But inside the band, his time was up. He was replaced, and the band moved on. But something was different. The energy wasn't the same. The bond wasn't there. Fans noticed. The chemistry was off. Even the music, while still technically sharp, felt colder, like something had been lost. And it had. What hurt even more was how the public narrative shifted. Michael Anthony was painted by some as the outsider, the one who didn't quite belong anymore. But the fans knew better. They remembered the early days, the way he held down the rhythm and lifted the vocals. They remembered the brotherhood before the breakdown. Years later, as interviews came out and both Michael and Alex reflected on what happened, the truth became clearer. It wasn't about one argument or one decision. It was years of building pressure, unchecked ego, personal struggles, and a lack of honest communication. And at the center of it all was a group of men who loved what they created, but couldn't keep it together. Fame had done what fame so often does. It gave them the world and then slowly took away the things that mattered most. Now, with Eddie gone, there are no more chances to make peace face to face. There will be no final reunion with the original lineup, no on-stage reconciliation. The past is fixed, and what's left is reflection and music. For Alex and Michael, the bond may never be what it was. Too much was said or not said, but there's a shared history they can never erase. A time when four guys came together and made rock history. A time when they were brothers. And then the fame came. And the brotherhood broke. Michael Anthony didn't leave Van Halen with a bang. There was no major fight in front of the cameras, no press conference, no long social media goodbye. He just faded out of the picture. But anyone who followed the band knew that his exit wasn't sudden. It had been building for a long time, quietly, slowly, until one day, one of the original pieces of the Van Halen puzzle was just gone, and with him, a part of the band's heart went too. From the very beginning, Michael was more than just the bassist. He was the glue guy, the one who kept things steady when egos clashed and emotions flared. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't chasing the spotlight. He just showed up, did the work, played with power, and brought a voice to the band that fans loved. Those high harmonies, the unmistakable backing vocals that gave Van Halen its full, rich sound. He joined the band back in the early 70s, when it was just a group of hungry kids from Pasadena trying to make something out of nothing. Michael met the Van Halen brothers through a mutual friend, and it didn't take long for them to realize they had chemistry. Eddie's guitar playing was like nothing anyone had heard before, and Alex's drumming had muscle and precision. When you added Michael's solid bass lines and vocal range, the foundation was complete. The band blew up fast. After getting signed to Warner Brothers in 1911, their debut album dropped in '78 and hit like an earthquake. Songs like Runnin' with the Devil and Ain't Talkin' About Love became instant classics. On stage, they were electric. Eddie and Alex were tight, and Michael was right there with them, holding it all together while David Lee Roth danced and screamed across the stage. And that was the dynamic for years. Michael never fought to be center stage. He didn't need to. His value wasn't in being loud. It was in being reliable, humble, and consistent. Every band needs someone like that. Someone who doesn't let the chaos throw them off. Someone who's always on time, always in tune, always there. But things changed. As the band's fame grew, the dynamics started to shift. Eddie Van Halen's talent wasn't just undeniable. It was otherworldly, but with that brilliance came control and, eventually, tension. He had a vision for the band and didn't always want to share that control with others. Over time, he became more demanding, more closed off, and more difficult to work with, especially as he struggled with addiction, perfectionism, and personal demons. Michael stayed quiet for the most part. He rarely spoke publicly about what was happening behind the scenes, but years later, in interviews, he started to share the truth. That there were growing cracks in the relationship, that rehearsals got harder, that Eddie's mood could flip in an instant, that the studio sessions, which used to be full of creativity and brotherhood, were now tense, stressful, and cold. Michael talked about how Eddie could be both brilliant and brutal. One minute, he'd be laughing with you. The next, he'd shut you out completely. And as time went on, Michael began to feel more like an employee than a bandmate. His parts were being rewritten. His voice wasn't being heard. The man who had helped shape the band's early sound was slowly being erased from the process. And then came the moment that sealed his fate. When Van Halen reunited with Sammy Hagar in the early 2000s, Michael found himself in an uncomfortable position. He wanted to be part of it. He had stayed loyal to the band, even through the messy years. But Eddie reportedly gave him an ultimatum. If he wanted to join the tour, he had to sign away his rights to the Van Halen name and logo. Essentially, he had to become a hired hand, not a founding member. Michael agreed, not because he didn't care, but because he loved the music and wanted to play. He still had hope that things could be fixed, that they could go back to how it used to be. But deep down, he must have known it was the beginning of the end. Soon after, Michael was pushed out completely when Van Halen brought Eddie's son Wolfgang into the band as the new bassist. It was official. The classic lineup was over. No real explanation was given to the fans. No thanks. No farewell. Just a quiet replacement, like Michael had never really mattered. But the fans noticed. Oh, they noticed. The sound was different. The feel was different. Wolfgang is talented, no doubt, but the chemistry that had once made Van Halen special was gone. And fans who had grown up with the band felt the loss deeply. Michael wasn't just another member. He was part of the band's DNA. For his part, Michael handled it with class. He didn't trash Eddie or Alex in public. He didn't go on long rants. He just told the truth when asked. He spoke kindly about the good times and respectfully about the hard ones. He never denied that Eddie was a genius, only that working with him had become nearly impossible in the later years. He admitted that the split hurt. How could it not? He had dedicated decades of his life to the band, and in the end, it felt like he'd been written out of the story. But he also said he had no regrets, because he knew what they had built together, the music, the memories, the connection with the fans, was something that couldn't be erased. Michael went on to play with Sammy Hagar in Chickenfoot and The Circle, continuing to tour and make music. And everywhere he went, fans told him the same thing. "We miss you in Van Halen." That wasn't just about the music. It was about what he represented: loyalty, humility, and heart. In the years before Eddie's death, there were whispers that maybe the band would reunite one last time, that maybe there'd be a chance to put everything behind them and stand on stage together again. But it never happened. And when Eddie passed away in 2020, the door closed for good. Michael mourned him like a brother. Despite all the pain, all the silence, all the distance, he never stopped loving the man who changed his life. In interviews after Eddie's death, you could hear the sadness in his voice, the what if hanging in the air. What if they had talked again? What if they had played one last show? What if they had forgiven? Michael Anthony's exit from Van Halen was more than just a lineup change. It was the end of an era of wild riffs, packed stadiums, and loud, joyful chaos. An era where four guys came together and made magic. And when Michael walked away, or was pushed away, that magic faded. Van Halen went on, but it was never quite the same. And for many fans, the band's true spirit left with Michael. Because sometimes it's not just about who's playing the notes. It's about who's standing beside you while you play them. Looking back at Van Halen's legacy is like looking at an old photo album. There are memories that make you smile, moments that bring a tear, and others that leave you wondering how something so beautiful could fall apart so badly. The band wasn't just about music. It was about energy, attitude, brotherhood, and at times pain. Now, years after the last notes have faded and Eddie Van Halen is gone, what's left behind is a complicated legacy that can't be tied up neatly. To the outside world, Van Halen was a rock and roll machine. They packed stadiums, sold millions of records, and shaped the sound of a generation. Eddie was seen as a guitar god. Alex, the heartbeat behind the kit. David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar brought wild vocals and big personalities. And Michael Anthony, the steady, loyal bassist whose harmonies gave every chorus wings. But inside that machine, things weren't always so smooth. Behind the music were real people with egos, emotions, and deep wounds. They built something incredible together, but over time that bond started to wear down. Misunderstandings turned into distance, creative tension became personal, and what was once a tight band of brothers slowly splintered. Eddie Van Halen, brilliant as he was, became one of the most complicated figures in rock history. He redefined guitar playing, no one argues that, but his genius came with a price. The more the band grew, the more pressure he felt to stay ahead, to keep creating, to push further than anyone had before. That pressure changed him. He became more controlling, more protective of the music, and more distant from those around him. Michael Anthony, who had been there since the beginning, slowly found himself on the outside. He wasn't angry about it, at least not publicly, but you could see the sadness in his later interviews. He loved the band, loved the fans, and loved playing. But the energy had shifted. The laughter they once shared backstage was gone. The trust had cracked. Even Alex, Eddie's own brother, had to walk a fine line. He was fiercely loyal to Eddie, but he knew things had changed. The band that had once felt like family was now more like a business, cold, structured, and tense. After Michael was pushed out and replaced by Eddie's son, Wolfgang, the band tried to keep going. They still played shows, they still had the name, but something was missing. It wasn't about the talent. Wolfgang was a solid player. It was the soul, that shared history, that spark that comes from people who've built something from scratch together. Fans felt it. Even if they couldn't explain it, they knew. Van Halen sounded great, but it didn't feel the same. There was no denying the music was still powerful. But the magic, it had faded. Then, in 2020, Eddie Van Halen passed away after a long battle with cancer. The news hit the rock world like a punch to the chest. He wasn't just a musician, he was a legend, an innovator, a force. And suddenly, all the arguments, the drama, and the tension between him and his bandmates were cast in a new light. There wouldn't be a reunion. There wouldn't be a final show. There wouldn't be a moment where they all stood together again, shoulder to shoulder, playing for the love of it like they used to. For Michael Anthony, it was heartbreaking. He spoke with respect about Eddie after his passing. No bitterness, just reflection. He said he wished they had reconnected before it was too late, that they could have talked, even just once. Not about the music, but about everything else. The years, the memories, the damage. There's something haunting about regret like that, the kind you carry quietly, even when you smile for the cameras. Alex took the loss harder than anyone. He and Eddie weren't just brothers in music. They were blood. They had played together since childhood. For Alex, Van Halen wasn't just a band. It was a bond with his little brother. After Eddie's death, Alex all but disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no tours, no music, just silence. That silence said more than any press release ever could. What's left now is a legacy that's part triumph, part tragedy. Van Halen changed the face of rock music. Their songs are still blasting on radios, still filling arenas through tribute bands, still inspiring young guitarists to dream big. But the human side of the story, the friendships lost, the trust broken, the conversations that never happened, lingers just as loudly. And yet, there's something powerful in how fans still hold on. They remember not just the riffs, but the raw joy of the music. They remember how those songs made them feel alive, free, seen. And that's something no scandal or fallout can erase. There have been quiet talks about a possible tribute show, something to honor Eddie's memory, to bring back the surviving members for one last celebration. But nothing has come together yet. Some fans hope Alex might return to the stage. Others believe he's done for good. And Michael? He's still out there playing with Sammy Hagar, keeping the spirit of the music alive in his own way. The question of what comes next isn't really about another album or tour. It's about how the story will be told. Will Van Halen be remembered as a band torn apart by ego, or as a group of gifted artists who created something unforgettable and human, flaws and all? Maybe it's both, because legacies, the real ones, are never simple. They're messy, they're beautiful and broken. They're filled with applause and silence, spotlight and shadow. Michael Anthony's journey with Van Halen represents that perfectly. He gave his heart to the band. He played with passion and loyalty. And in the end, he walked away not with anger, but with gratitude. Even when they shut him out, he still spoke kindly. He still said thank you, because he knew what they had done together mattered, and he knew fans would never forget. Neither will we. The music lives on, and so does the story. Not perfect, but powerful. A complicated legacy of respect, regret, and everything in between.